In the early days of the internet, radical libertarians were scattered, lonely, and faceless. Without direction, they resigned to scour the web, sifting through content providers in a wasteland plagued by YouTube demonetization, Facebook jail, and covert internet censorship. But then, in 2017, the Libertarian Union was formed. Finally, the average Joe libertarian could find a thriving community of independent podcasters and content providers, all in one convenient location. At Libertarian Union, we'll always have the latest news, interviews, discussions, and even movie reviews. With hundreds of episodes and more added all the time, you'll always find something fresh at libertarianunion.com.
All right. Let's get fired up here.
Maximum freedom. Read.
Stay on target.
Maximum freedom.
Stay on target.
Maximum freedom. Read Rothbard.
Hello and welcome to the Actual Anarchy podcast, the podcast where we talk about those movies from that Rothbardian anarcho-capitalist perspective. And tonight we are back on track. We are on a, what do they call it? Like a back on track payment plan. We've owed you this episode for a few weeks now, but Robert fell ill. His sickly old body has finally started crapping out on him. And so we had a special guest join us for guest hosting duties on the movie Ratatouille. He was a professional chef, is a professional chef, and so he had a very unique perspective and was able to fill in quite nicely for Mr. Robert Johnson, my actual co-host on the Actual Anarchy podcast. If you do like Dan Reed, the culinary libertarian who joined us, to check out his website at culinarylibertarian.com. He's got a podcast of his own, and the episode that he was on for us was Actual Anarchy 109. This one is on Death Wish, 1974 and 2018. Death Wish is the 110th episode of the Actual Anarchy podcast, and the show notes and more can be found at actualanarchy.com/110. Robert, how are you?
Oh, I'm back and better than ever now with 80% less disease. I'm pretty stoked about it. I was laid up fairly hard with some, well, I'd never had pink eye before in my life, but now I've had pink eye, so that's exciting.
Hey, Kobe, how'd that ass taste?
Yeah, nutty. It was good. I don't know. It was all right.
That was a Shaquille O'Neal diss rap with against Kobe Bryant back in the day.
Yeah, so I apologize if there's any coughs or sniffles. I'm still recovering. I'm going to try and hit my mute button pretty good, but I don't always make it.
All right. Well, I'm glad that you are feeling better. And in our pre-show content, which is available for our Patreon supporters at actualanarchy.com/Patreon, you got to hear how surprised I was at the quality of your health at the moment, among other things. So do check that out if you are so inclined. We do appreciate all you Patreon supporters. It helps keep 1, 2, 3 lights on this end. And Robert, you got at least 1 or 2 on your side there.
Shit's so bright.
Gotta wear shades. I don't have shades, man. I should be wearing my sunglasses at night here. Anyway, why don't we get into that Last Nighters portion of the show, speaking of sunglasses at night, if you're okay with that?
Is that where we wear sunglasses at night on the Last Nighters portion of the show?
That's what we should be doing because we're so cool and hip.
Oh, we will now.
It's going to be a new thing starting episode 111 because I don't actually have them here right now. But let's get into that Last Nighters portion of the show. Hey everyone, it's Daniel and Robert, Daniel Elwood and Robert Johnson of the Last Nighters podcast. We are the Last Nighters, and we are also found on the Launchpad Media, where they're always launching new ideas in your direction. This episode is a week late, I think. Robert was sick last week, so we had a guest come on and do Ratatouille with us, but we are doing the Death Wish Death Match tonight on the Last Nighters. 1974 with Chuck Bronson versus 2018 with Bruce Willis, Death Wish. And Robert, speaking of Death Wish, you have recovered from a near-death experience of being riddled with disease and illness, and it sounds like you're feeling a lot better.
Well, you're not hearing the parts where I mute the mic and then I go and I hawk up a lung, but I'm mostly enough recovered. I'm going to try and record this episode. Hopefully it turns out all right, and you're not going to be spent editing out a whole bunch of crap.
Well, if editing out crap was what I needed to do on the show, we wouldn't have a show because, that's what the show is, really.
It'd just be an hour of silence.
Yeah, an hour of silence. I'm not sure anyone would listen to it, but it might be really artistic, right? It would be a statement.
It's like that painting of all white and call it snow. Sounds good.
You gotta really understand it to get it, man. And speaking of getting it, the bad guys get it in these movies here. So why don't we start off with the El Google Descriptione, shall we?
Which film?
Well, let's do both. I've got the new one pulled up. Let's get the old one pulled up as well. And that way we can do the compare and contrast. So it's take just a moment here. Okay, Death Wish, 1974 film versus Death Wish, 2018. And for whatever reason, it's not giving me the Google description. Hold on. Let's make this happen.
Flawless content on the AA show. Nothing but professionalism here, ladies and gentlemen.
Well, I really should have prepared more better. Oh, there we go. All right. We might edit a few of this craps out here. Okay, the Google description for the first episode up for bid, Death Wish, or first movie up for bid, Death Wish, 1974 drama thriller, 1 hour, 34 minutes, 7 out of 10 on the IMDb, 65% Rotten Tomatoes, and 3 out of 4 from Mr. Roger Ebert, and no rating from the Google description people. It's asking me did you like this movie? Thumbs up, thumbs down. I have not responded yet, and apparently not enough people have. But let's get into that written description here. Once a mild-mannered liberal, New York City architect Paul Kersey, played by Charles Bronson, snaps when intruders break into his home, murdering his wife and violently raping his daughter. A business trip to Tucson, Arizona lands him a gift from a client, a revolver he uses to patrol the streets when he returns home. Frustrated that the police cannot find the intruders, he becomes a vigilante, gunning down any criminal that crosses his path. The public finds this vigilantism heroic. Came out July 24, 1974. The director was Michael Winner, and the box office was $20.3 million on a $3 million budget. And would you like to respond to that one, or should we start with the new one as well and then kind of do the compare-contrasty stuff?
Yeah, sure. Let's do that. The second thing you said.
The second thing, all right. Robert has chosen door number 2 on this episode of The Last Nighters, which I don't know if I said the Last Nighters episode number yet, but it is 53. So you can find the show notes and more at lastnighters.com/53. Death Wish 2018 with Bruce Willis, 6.4 on the IMDb, 17% Rotten Tomatoes, so people hated it. Metacritic, 31%. However, 86% of them Google users like this movie. And here's the description. Dr. Paul Kersey is a surgeon who often sees the consequences of the city's violence in the emergency room. When home intruders brutally attack his wife and young daughter, Kersey becomes obsessed with delivering vigilante justice to the perpetrators. As the anonymous slayings grab the media's attention, the public begins to wonder if the deadly avenger is a guardian angel or the Grim Reaper himself. It was initially released in Indonesia on March 6th of 2018. Directors Eli Roth, budget of $30 million, and a box office of $48.6 million. Of course, has the incomparable Bruce Willis, who seems to be making as many movies as Nick Cage, and maybe slightly higher quality. But what do you think about the two Google descriptiones, Robert?
Well, it's an interesting choice to remake. I know that the original Death Wish movies, spawned a few sequels that were fairly well received. And then Chuck Bronson went on to make a whole bunch of other movies, like kind of these action revenge type movies with the director Winner guy.
Yeah, Michael Winner.
Yeah. The only thing I think the 2018 version, it's interesting that the 2018 version isn't as well received as the original. Maybe because we have higher standards these days, because I think that the 2018 version is an objectively better film. It's a way better made. Although I think that Bruce Willis either has lost the ability to act or never had it to begin with. I mean, he's okay in certain roles. I mean, he was great in Die Hard. He's great in Pulp Fiction, but he had limited roles. He had limited, emotional range that he had to portray. This movie has him doing the whole gamut: anger, sadness, loss, despair, happiness, just everything. And some scenes are so wooden where I'm like, was that the best take you had? Really? You don't want to do another take? Because it sounded like Bruce is like thinking about something else while he's reading the line as if he's a robot reading off the cue card. It was terrible. But other scenes, he's pretty good. He when he's kind of crying over his dead wife, or he's angry about, the cops not doing anything, and so he had to go on and become this vigilante. You believe it a bit, and the whole movie itself is pretty good. I'm surprised at the super low ratings, and I'm surprised that the movie didn't make much money. I wonder if Bruce Willis wasn't, if the movie wouldn't have made more money with a different actor. Maybe there's some name recognition and it got a little bit of extra money, but I'm not so sure. It seems like Bruce Willis is a guy that should be let go into the pasture and off into the sunset. He's done his duty. I would have given this to another guy, maybe a little bit younger guy. Although I do enjoy the old man that wants to protect his family and fails, and it's a good storyline. I like the revenge storyline, but there are issues with it, which hopefully we'll have time to get into, because I've got notes. Got notes, Daniel.
All right, notes and notes and notes. All right. Well, I've got a little bit of reaction to what you're saying, and I do agree that Bruce Willis can be quite wooden, though I thought he was pretty good in this movie. When you look at his catalog of films, there's a bunch of stuff you never even heard of. I mean, this guy is prolifically doing roles, and aside from your occasional, breakout hit in Die Hard, and then where he basically becomes the same guy, the John McClane with the charm and the action, he's pretty stiff, I would say. But it sort of works well in this movie, I think. And I don't think I would have had somebody different do this. And if Chuck Bronson is any indication, he was 52 during the first one, and they made 4 more. So by the 5th one, I believe he was 72 years young. Spring Chicken. And they get progressively worse, or so I hear. 2, 3, 4, and 5. But it sounds to me like if I were to pose the question to you, Chuck Bronson versus Bruce Willis, who would win? Your response would be what?
Well, I relate more to Bruce Willis, and I think the role in this 2018 version was written better. Like, he had more visceral things to do. So there were scenes where he was, showing emotion and, showing how much he loved his family and stuff like that. In the original 74 version, or whatever year it is, 74?
You are correct, sir.
There are a few things the movie does better, which I wish they had continued, but for the most part, no. Like the original movie, he just, his wife is killed and his daughter's in this coma, and then he just pisses off to Tucson, and he's just hanging out doing architect stuff, and they're showing some scenes about him in the desert hanging out doing stuff, and it's like, what does this have to do with the movie? When is this movie going to get back to being a movie? Even the cameraman's bored. He doesn't want to be here. But then you go, okay, so he's going to get a gun. All right. Well, the way the 2018 movie handles is way better. I mean, just go buy a gun.
Well, Chicago, it's a little bit tough.
Well, and then the movie, travels into disbelievability because of that. Like at one point he buys like an automatic machine gun. Just on a day, just like, I bought one today. Let's go buy it.
And that kick-ass coffee table where it kicks out.
Yeah, he just buys it. Just no problem. Chicago. Yeah, right. But the one thing that I liked better about the 74 version, and the two are fairly different, but there's one thing that I like better about the 74 version, and that is after he kills his first person, he is shaken by it. There's a scene where he goes into his back home, and he pukes up. He tosses his cookies. He is like, oh my God, I can't believe what I just did. There's no dialogue. There's no one for him to talk to, but he has to express it all, his body language. And he's just so upset because he's just a regular guy. But then when Bruce Willis goes out and kills a guy, he goes home, turns on the news. He's super into it. He's excited. And then he's seeing the response of what happened. And he's just happy about it. And he has a little nap, but he never seems bothered by what he had to do until the very end where he's talking to his brother. And he's like, man, my wife and family, my family's gone, basically, and nothing happened. Nothing bad happened to the people that did it to him. And, he wanted this justice. And so he did have a little bit of an emotional response, but I thought the 74 version did it better with him having to be, like a normal guy having this traumatic experience, even though he, basically went out hunting basically for muggers. But I like the new version better, the 2018 version better, because it's a more coherent story. It's about Bruce Willis's, story of him getting revenge on the actual people that hurt his family. The 74 version, he's like, well, my wife and daughter got killed, or well, my daughter's in a crazy bin and my wife is dead. So I'm just going to go on this revenge against muggers in general. Like Jeff Goldblum is in there like attacking his family, and then we never see Jeff Goldblum again.
Actually, we do, just one time.
Do we?
He passes them by in the park. They're coming up the stairs. He's going down the stairs, and I think they bump into each other. But there is no like resolution to that. He doesn't end up finding them again. And in a way, I think that actually makes the story better. Like I agree that it's more complete in the 2018, but you gotta understand in the 70s, it's like they were very heavy on the social commentary, and that's actually why he went to Tempe, Arizona, or Tucson. But having that open, unresolved ending, I think it was intentional, and actually, part of the story it was that it was left open, that he was now in a position where he's like inspiring others to take individual responsibility for their own defense.
I can see the original being as more of one man's descent into, like finding a taste for justice and vigilantism and going around just finding, justice and finding injustice and righting the wrongs on the spot. But and that's more of like a Breaking Bad kind of a storyline where like it's more about him and his journey to becoming, I don't know, some sort of judge, jury, and executioner. Some sort of superhero type person.
Well, sure, but there's
as
also
opposed to the 2018, which is actually, a beginning, a middle, and an end, and all has to deal with this one group, one action.
Right. Which I want to get into that a little bit when we move further on. But back to the 74 just for a little bit. I mean, this is one of the original classic revenge thrillers that kind of gave it that cult classic edge to it.
So there's no revenge on the people that did with the thing.
Right, but on bad guys in general, and it also shows the ineptitude of the police bureaucratic monopoly, right? It shows the incompetence of government to solve the problem, and it also shows an individual accepting responsibility for their own safety, and it shows how it's a much more effective solution. In fact, the police spend more resources and effort trying to track him down than the criminals, right? There's one scene where they're talking about, what do we know about this guy? And they pan the room, and there's like 50 police people in there, all working on finding Chuck Bronson, right? And it's like they've given up on all of the street crime hoodlum thugs, and they're only focused on this one guy because the optics of it, because he's showing how inept they are and how basically they're out of a job if they can't contain this information.
And right? I like that. That's a very realistic scene. Because whenever anything comes out that makes the cops look bad, that's when they really devote all their resources to it to try and solve it. Like when a cop gets killed, they go pull out all the stops to go get the guy who did it.
Oh, yeah. Yep. And they become the vigilantes, if you will.
Like, and then that guy's never going to make it. He's always killed in a hail of bullets.
Yeah, there's never a trial at that point.
Right.
Yeah. So the, let's see, I have a point here somewhere. Oh, so back to sort of what I was saying, and then related to what you were saying earlier, they're heavy on the social commentary, but this is back when the inner cities were really falling apart. And especially places like New York, the subway was just overtaken, very run down, lots of graffiti, basically, from what I understand, like controlled by criminal element and not the ones that wear the badges. And if you want to see another example of this, I think there's a James Bond movie with Roger Moore where he's in New York, and I forget which one it is. You might remember, but it really shows how run down and crappy New York was at the time. And actually Malcolm Gladwell, who I forget which book it is, and you might know, Robert, but he had this theory that the crime reduction is due to the availability of abortions. And so there's fewer unwanted kids who would have been raised in broken homes, and thus there's less crime as you get through the 80s and 90s. I find that to be an interesting argument from him. And I don't know are you familiar with this argument at all?
No, I'm vaguely familiar with a few of his works. I'm not super familiar with that argument. That's the first time I've ever heard this.
All right. And I haven't read this in a long time. I think it was The Tipping Point or something like that. But it was various chapters on different issues. One of them was how they were able to look at statistics in grades on what teachers were grading papers on or tests on. And they could see that the teachers were putting their thumb on the scale because a lot of their performance or their incentives for more salary and whatnot is based on the kids' scores or their ratings and things like that. But anyway, one of them was about street crime. And his idea was basically that once abortion became legalized, it meant that there were fewer unwanted and thereby poorly raised children, which as they grow in a generational aspect, it reduces crime because there's fewer of the people who would be more inclined for that based on, their limited circumstances or what have you. However, my opinion is that it's far more correlative than causal. And I would also posit it's not a justification for murdering people.
Yeah, I don't think you can get away with that one just because you said, well, I was born into an unwanted home. So
right, but the 74 movie, it's basically showing the crime, and this was the era of white flight. This is, and they actually show this where Bronson considers moving to the suburbs. I think he's talking with somebody and they're like, yeah, we should move to the suburbs so our families are safe. And then we just commute into the city for our jobs. Then we commute back out. And in more current time, now it's this, and that's considered racist, by the way. But now it's gentrification. Now people are moving back into the city.
And that's racist too, by the way.
Yes. So you can't do anything and not be racist. Everyone is racist. Or so goes the Lego song. Everyone is racist, apparently. So anyway, but that point we made about the government monopoly on police services, and therefore they have no incentive to actually solve problems. Their biggest concern was how it looks. So they bury the statistics that show the unfavorable perception of their effort and how crime was reduced by something like 40 or 50% once the criminals knew that there was a chance that somebody might be armed and able to defend themselves.
That's just one guy or just a few guys, right? Like even him and a couple of copycats. Like for the entire city, just knowing that there's a chance that you could get shot by a few of your victims, and that reduces crime by 40%.
Right. In this, fictional story, but I think it would have an effect because
we know it has an effect.
Right. Yeah. I mean, if your potential victims may have a means to defend themselves, then the likelihood of you attacking them is going to be much lower than if definitely they're not able to defend themselves.
Yeah, that's right, baby.
But so this is back to where it's sort of the social commentary, and Chuck Bronson is actually speaking this in the dialogue, and it's why the whole Tucson, Arizona thing happens, because they set it up to where he's this anti-violence, conscientious objector from the Korea days, and he needs to see the juxtaposition between how they're unarmed in New York and all these crimes happening, but then he's shown in Tucson where almost everyone has a gun and crime is so much lower because there's immediate repercussions. And so that's that kernel of the idea. That's showing that when you are able to defend yourself and the criminal element knows you have the capacity to do so, then there's less crime. And they make it so like over the top obvious in the 74 version.
Yeah, and it's less obvious in the 2018 version. And that's one of the scenes that I had an issue with. And it needed to happen for the story. But so in the 2018 version, the gang gets the address of the home off of their like GPS navigation system in the car because one of the guys is a valet at a restaurant. And I understand it's a revenge story. The mother needs to die. The daughter needs to get hurt to be basically a remake of the original. But the reality of the situation is thieves almost never invade a home where they even suspect that anybody's actually there. It's just super, super, super rare. Like Truman Capote wrote a book in Cold Blood about one time it happened. It's super never happens. People don't like being seen committing crimes. The chance that, it just introduces all kinds of more risk to the situation. The people that are there could not only see you and then run away, call a neighbor, could have a cell phone, could have a gun, be armed, could have an alarm system that could trigger. Any number of things could happen and go wrong for your burglary. That it's just having people home or lights being on or any of these things is a huge deterrent to crime. Not only that, but just the idea that there could be a gun in the home. So it's a highly unlikely event that this kind of scenario would ever actually take place. But I'm not to say that it's not impossible. It could happen.
Well, how it's set up is that they're not supposed to be home, and that's why they're targeted.
Well, they know they're home.
In the original part, I thought that they return home from a movie, like they were going to go to this celebratory dinner, and we're talking about the 2018 version, right? Yeah. So valet guy slips the information to the thugs to rob the place because they think that the family is going to be out celebrating this dinner at some fancy restaurant. Dad, Willis, gets called into work, and so mom and daughter go out somewhere else for a shorter amount of time. Criminals break into the house. Mom and daughter return home and find the criminals already in the house.
Is that how it happens?
Yes. So the criminals broke in not expecting anyone to be there. Like they planned this, hey, they're going to be gone. We're going to break in. We're going to steal stuff. We're going to get out.
Oh, okay. Well, that was not clear from my repeated viewings of the film. If that's, you're probably right about that because you seem pretty sure about that. But every time I've seen it, like the mom and the daughter are there in the house. And then it's quite a while before they realize that, oh, there's a window open. Oh, there could be somebody here.
Right. And I think that the moment you might have missed is when they're driving up to the house, the mom and the daughter, and it's just the two of them. They're returning home from some, shorter amount of time than fancy dinner. So the criminals thought they had, 2-3 hours, and mom and daughter went out for ice cream instead. Something like that.
Okay. So Robert's wrong. It's all okay. It's all good. Still, everything I said was right, though. except for the movie part, being home, having people around, having risk involved. So you see, even that proves my point that they wouldn't have wanted to rob it while people were home. They would rather people were not there.
Right. Yeah. And then even when there's the confrontation, they don't even want to cause physical harm. There's the one guy who's threatening to rape the daughter, but even the other criminal's trying to keep him in check. And then once the mom and daughter fight back and there's like a struggle, evidence of some sort or something that's like, okay, they're just like, all right, fuck it. Let's just end this and commit, violence by shooting them because one of them was about to escape or whatever. But it was not something that they had intended to do, not something they planned to do, but they became frustrated and went into the, extra level, the whole nother level of violence in the 2018.
Things escalate because people resist.
Right. And back to your point about, having the lights on and all of these things, being home, potential for having a gun in the home. It's almost a relative thing. It's like you just need to be less visibly a target than the other options out there for the criminals, right? Because it's a deterrent. I mean, a determined person will be able to overcome a lot of things. But if it's a numbers game, it's just they're looking for easy marks. They're looking for something that's easy to do that is low risk. And that's why having concealed carry and having lights and having video cameras and these things are deterrents. Locking your doors, all of these things.
Right.
Just make it that
if anybody really wants to get in, they can get in through a window or any number of things. But yeah, if it's more effort, you're just less likely.
Right. Now, I wanted to bring up the idea of the conscientious objector from the Chuck Bronson movie.
Okay.
Because it ties right in with the Jordan Peterson concept of virtue is having the capacity to cause harm, but choosing not to. Does this sound familiar to you?
Virtue is the capacity to cause harm, but choosing not to?
Right. Showing restraint. Being powerful or having your own power, but using restraint and using your moral code to not exercise that power.
I'd say that's one aspect of virtue, but okay, go ahead.
Well, it's the one that I'm choosing to pick on here.
Okay, pick on it.
Because in the 74 version, Chuck is a conscientious objector, though he was still in the military, I think, as a medic. But I think that's why they didn't send him to the front lines. But it's showing that he was in the military. He is, they show him in the very first scene, like shirts off. I mean, the dude is fit, right? He's like buff. And he's a tough dude. And in the book, actually, it was more of an accountant type, a squirrely guy. And apparently the original production team was looking at people like Dustin Hoffman for the movie. And Bronson was like, no, if you want me, we got to change the guy's occupation. We got to change his backstory. He's got to be like a tougher guy who's manly, but doesn't want to cause harm. So he has more restraint, more control over his emotions and more ability. And it also shows him as not just any order follower, right? He was, and I don't know if there's a draft during the Korean War. Do you know? There must have been, right? Because there was during the Vietnam War. So
no, I don't think there was during the Korean War. It could be wrong, though.
Okay. Well, the movie was made 74 Vietnam time. So maybe I'm sort of filling in some holes here, making some shit up right here, but that's what
do
on the last night. But I could see him in the story saying, okay, I'm not going to go and kill people for you, but I'm also not going to stand in front of that train, right? So if you're going to threaten me with violence to make me go somewhere and do something, I'll be a conscientious objector. I'll be a medic. I'll do good things as best I can in the situation. So it's showing that he's not just any order follower. And that's something we talked about with Mance Rayder on our Dances with Wolves episode, where he's like, an order follower is like the worst level of human, right? It's I'm just doing my job. I'm just enforcing laws. I don't write them. And from our Larkin Rose concepts, Hitler would have been just a crazy guy if people didn't follow his orders.
Yeah, I mean, if you're going to say that the order followers are the worst level of human, I think that throws a whole lot of humanity under the bus. I don't know if they're the absolute worst level, but they don't get a special pass from me. That's for sure.
Right. But Chuck Bronson in the movie, he's not just another order follower, I think. Like, he's got a mind of his own. He's making decisions. He's accepting individual responsibility. And on his trip to Tucson, he sees the effectiveness of that. And that's what the police are afraid of. They're afraid of that effectiveness being broadcast and known.
Yeah, they like to, have a monopoly. They have people rely on them. Can't be seen as taking the law into their own hands, as they say. I like that there was, like in both movies, there's a kind of a public debate on the situation of, whether what is his name? Like the Angel of Death, or what's he called?
The Grim Reaper.
Whether the Grim Reaper is a good or bad thing. And you got people on both sides. My stance on vigilantism is that the individual who is harmed has a better idea of what justice is than the state. The state, you get a one-size-fits-all level of justice, and it's in the opinion of somebody who you may not agree with. Some judge guy who you may think is incompetent, who has nothing to do with the situation, and that may be for the best. Maybe you want a completely impartial person, but even the judge can all they can do is follow the law as written down by a bunch of politicians. So all they can do is throw somebody in a cage or not, or assign them to community service or not, and different levels of that, if the law even allows for that. But the best person to know what justice is the person's directly involved. Maybe you don't want that person to go to jail, but maybe you do want them to do something else.
Or some recompense for the victim.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, I think that the whole concept of justice is a challenge for sure. I don't think that the current system where it's monopolized by the state is effective or has the proper feedback or economic calculation associated with it. And there's a great article by Marianne Rothbard about this on the police, and it's basically shows how they fail the market test and how private provision of policing would be far better and more effective. And I think the folks over at libertyweekly.net have some episodes related to that as well. So I'll post all of that on our show notes page at lastnighters.com/53.
Well, let's talk a little bit more about the 74 movie, because, I just love watching this movie. Just reconfirmed my love for the look of 70s movies. First of all, I love the style, the fashion. But then when he goes to Tucson and there's that double horned car, that was so epic, so epic. And then there's a scene in an airport where you could tell they had not enough extras because they would have the same people walking back and forth in the background over and over again. I don't know if you have to watch that scene a couple of times, but you could see the same person like 3 times. It's like, okay, they're going off to the left. Oh, and they're going back to the right. Did they forget something? Oh, they're going back to the left. Yeah, it's fun.
I did not notice that, so good catch.
But anyway, with both movies, I have to ask you, is Chuck or Bruce, are they perfect moral characters, or did they cross the line at any point for you?
That is a good question. And it's actually been a little while since I've watched this. I watched the 74 version on Christmas Eve at the Christmas cabin that our family rented. And it was on my little phone, and I was trying to get my 3-year-old daughter to fall asleep. So sort of half distracted, but...
You want me to remind you of a scene maybe where he does cross the line?
In your opinion, he crosses the line at what point?
Well, I'm just opening it up for discussion, but there's one point where he's walking down the streets with, the gun, and he's out looking for no good, looking for trouble. And he comes across a guy getting beat up by 3 other, thugs guys. And he walks down, like tough guy into the alleyway. And the 3 thug guys get up and they go, oh, look at what we got here. And they stop beating up the one guy. And then they all brandish their weapons and they walk towards Chuck in a threatening manner, like a challenge. Like, okay, we're going to meet your challenge, tough guy. And Chuck pulls out his gun and he guns down one guy and then he guns down another guy. And then by this time, the 3rd guy has started to run, and he runs and he starts climbing up a chain link fence, and Chuck runs after him and he shoots him in the back.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Is any and all of that okay?
Yeah, that's a tough question. I'd say that his initial interaction was in defense of the other man, and being outnumbered, I think that it would be considered a legitimate use of self-defense to fire at the people who are threatening you in that way. But the chasing down of the 3rd guy after the threat had been eliminated does seem to be beyond the accepted levels of self-defense in what I think is the current standard in being prosecuted or not.
It's kind of hard to argue that a guy you shoot in the back was a threat to your health. I mean, if he was a cop, he probably would have gotten away with it just fine.
Right.
But-
Yeah, just toss another gun on the ground and kick it.
Yeah. Sprinkle some crack cocaine near him, and it's all good.
So I think Chuck does go maybe above and beyond in that. And then there's a similar scene in the Bruce Willis version where I think Bruce gets beat up, right? He's like trying to protect somebody, and the two guys just like kick the shit out of him. And this might be before he ends up with a gun.
Yeah, this is before he ends up with a gun.
Right. And that's from one of the shooting victims that he treats at the hospital.
Well, what about the scene where he goes and basically just straight up murders the car mechanic guy?
Yeah, car mechanic guy. And he says, well, I didn't do it. Jack did.
Yeah, and he pulls the jack out and the car crashes down on him, smashes his brain wide open.
Yeah, that's
after torturing the guy.
Oh, yeah. With
opening up the sciatic nerve and then putting like a caustic whatever agent on it, like transmission fluid or whatever.
Yeah, he's like, yeah, this is what they say is the worst possible experience of pain that anyone can have. And
without having a heart attack? Mm-hmm.
So without killing you, I'm going to torture you. It's like putting him on the rack in The Princess Bride and taking years off his life.
And tell me how you feel. Be honest now. It's for posterity.
Yeah, I think the car thing was over the top. That's probably for certain, though.
This is a guy that had attacked and possibly murdered his wife.
Right. Yeah.
And put his daughter in the hospital in a coma.
I mean, what's the other potential response in the current paradigm, right? There's the police services who have been ineffective, though they do say that because this isn't just the normal level of crime, that there's usually more to go on.
Right. But the whole time, Bruce is given no, confidence that this is going to be solved anytime soon, or that these cops really are going to be able to do anything.
From Hank from Breaking Bad,
who actually is probably the best actor in this movie.
Yeah, he had the most going on in it, but he's Hank from
which is great. I love Hank. I want to see more Hank.
But yeah, I think he probably does go too far. Now, before we wind down, because we're already getting long in the tooth here.
Wow, this is going quick.
It is going quick, and we got a lot more to talk about, I'm sure. But the whole point of this movie being brought up was based on a friend of ours, a mutual friend, who suggested it. And you said that they identified a certain point being made in the final 10 or 15 minutes of the movie that was like a big deal, and that's why they wanted us to talk about it. So
right.
I watched this movie, and I'm like, okay, I'm looking for this. What is it? What was the thing that he thought was a big deal and would be so obvious that we'd be able to talk about it? Because when I'm watching it, I'm like, totally fine, legitimate use of defense in the final 10 minutes, defending himself. So what's the argument?
Well, I don't know. He didn't tell me. So all we can do is speculate. And I assume that the argument is what Hank says at the very, very end. And that you were a guy, and worried about this guy coming after your daughter. So you bought some guns to protect your family, and you came in, broke in, you killed him, and that's what anybody would do. I assume that's the argument, and that should be perfectly legal and fine. And the cops should be totally on board with that, no problem. But in reality, I think that Bruce Willis would be doing time for that automatic rifle in the Chicago suburbs or whatever, because that's like totally illegal in Chicago. That's like a complete weapon ban, isn't it?
I think that you have to have certain licenses, and only certain types of firearms are permitted and allowed.
I mean, there's no way. And that thing's a completely fully automatic rifle.
Yeah, I don't recall that portion.
And it was suppressed? I mean, come on. There's no way that thing's legal.
Well, in the sake of argument for the movie, he had all the proper paperwork for it.
Right.
In whatever fictional bureaucratic paperwork he needed to have. And I thought it was interesting when he went to the gun store originally, and the cutesy girl who's in the video, he ends up talking to her about, oh yeah, we can totally set you up. You just got to fill this out and this out and this out. And then it's like super easy. And then they do this background check and it's like really quick. But even that level of stuff, which I thought the movie was trying to make it sound like it was actually easy, was a ton of crap to deal with. Just to get the capacity to defend yourself.
Right. But maybe his argument is that, because Hank knows he's the killer. Hank knows he's the Grim Reaper the whole time, or at least towards the end of the movie.
Yeah, he's figured it out, and he's sort of giving him this
wink, wink.
Hey,
everything's okay as long as you're done.
Right, as long as you're done, that gun's going to disappear, or whatever one that was left at one of the scenes, or whatever.
Right, as long as you're done, we're not coming after you, and you did the right thing, and we're tacitly approving of you doing this, and I'm totally satisfied.
And then he eats that slice of pizza. Now I'm satisfied.
I think the original 74 is more realistic in the cops being challenged by the appearance of a vigilante, and they have to put an end to it.
But they can't go after him either.
Right, but they can't go after him either.
Yeah, so they're kind of hemmed in by their own thing, and so they just want to make him go away. And I took that as they want to run him out of town or kill him.
Yeah, but they still want the benefit of having him around. I mean, less crime does make them look good. They don't want crime to go away entirely because they are a government business and they need to have some excuse for them to exist.
Yeah, okay, I'm following you. So, do you think that there was a problem at the end with the police sort of giving the nod and letting it go? Because I was kind of okay with that.
I think it doesn't happen in real life, but if I am either one of those guys, I would be totally fine with it, of course. Even if, Bruce does cross lines in getting justice for his family. Because imagine, they don't show Bruce murdering any innocent people. And that's always the risk you take, right? When you're operating on incomplete and imperfect information, when you're, kind of like seeking out people based on, well, I'm going to torture this one guy, and this one guy gives up another guy. Well, I'm just going to go kill that other guy now. Well, you could get any kind of faulty information off of a torture victim. They're just going to tell you whatever you want to hear in order for you to stop torturing them. But that's the risk you take. I mean, if I'm going off and killing somebody who I believe, murdered my family, but it turns out that that's an innocent guy, well, now I'm guilty of murder. And there's no justice to be, then I'm the bad guy. That's the risk you take.
Yeah, I think if there wasn't the statist justice system in place, that there would be alternatives brought forth on the market, and there would be more proliferation of people having the capacity to defend themselves that would reduce crime even further. And there would be systems and mechanisms in place that would not only prevent crime, but also yield results when crimes happen and recompense for the victims.
Not to mention all the crime, and not to excuse the crime, but all the crime that's absolutely just created by government fiat, by government decree, or by government picking winners and losers, or
right,
by government incentivizing people to be poor, or to punish the people when they try and produce. Government creates all kinds of havoc within the market and is probably guilty of essentially 90% of all crime. Not to say that crime would go away without government. I'm not a utopian, but of all the ways that government influences our lives in a negative way, it's got to have some effect, not only psychological, but just real world, boots on the ground. Man, I just got screwed out of, the X this job, or X amount of money. I can't get this job. Well, I got to rob somebody. I mean, it's never that cut and dry, but that insidious influence the government has of, like when, how about the drug situation? When Bruce kills the Iceman, or the ice cream man, or whoever that guy's name was. I had a little bit of an issue with that, just because, well, on the one hand, he is shooting kids in the leg that want to walk to school but won't sell drugs for him,
and
which is
threatening to murder them the next time.
Yeah, which is objectively horrific and immoral, but also a really dumb business plan. Like, if you're looking for employees, there's going to be way more people that are just going to want to earn a buck than you forcing them to serve you and then causing all kinds of retribution to come down on you because you're out murdering children. I mean, to think that that's not going to have a negative impact on your business is just ridiculous. But also, in general, drug dealers are just people that want to serve clients, and the government has made this artificial scarcity on a product. And without the ability of the justice system to negotiate, disagreements, they are left to, private mediation or violence to solve their disputes. And you're also talking about, people that are risky enough and living that risky lifestyle, probably not also super smart, if I could make a totally broad blanket statement, and maybe they're not going to be all mediating. But I would say that, private mediation does happen, and it probably happens a lot more than you'd know, because the only thing that does get the headlines is the violence. But anyway, drug dealers are not all bad, but when Bruce just goes out and murders that ice cream man, what did you think about that, Daniel?
Well, I thought he was coming to the defense of that kid who was being threatened with being murdered if he didn't continue to do the bidding of the ice cream man. So it was an emancipation, if you will, and it wasn't directly related to him being a drug dealer. And in fact, if drugs weren't a crime, it would have been a non-issue. The other feedback I have, and while you were speaking, I had a bunch of ideas, but only a couple are going to show up here. The the whole concept of justice and mediation. Robert P. Murphy has a book called Chaos Theory, which I'll post a link to down below, and Ed Stringham has done a lot of work on this. There are a lot of private arbitration and private security that people really aren't that aware of, but there are more private security officers in the United States than police officers. There are dispute resolution via credit cards and Yelp and eBay. They all have mediation and dispute resolution services that they offer for protecting people from fraud or shoddy product and things like that. The other thing related to the police, just in general, the FBI in their own reports say that only something like 48 or 50% of all violent crime is even reported to the police, and their closure rate on violent crime is something like 30 or 40%, and solve rate for property crimes is something like 18%. And they even make the argument that in the movie, the 2018 version, that police only arrive after the crime has occurred. And Steph Molyneux makes that point, that they're just, what do you call it? They're crime historians. They come there and fill out some paperwork and mark down some statistics and whatnot. So the amount of policing that actually happens from and I called it a monopoly before, and in a way it still kind of is, even though there is, more private security and things like that, but it's like a different realm in my mind here. But their effectiveness is actually quite low. And I referenced Liberty Weekly earlier. They have a couple of episodes related to the SCOTUS decisions about how there's no duty to protect for the public in regards to the police. So the police don't actually have to protect you when there's a crime actually occurring in the moment, and they can't be found liable for failing to do so.
Right. I did like that the character of Bruce Willis in both of them, really, but we get the actual dialogue with the Bruce Willis character that I recall was when he feels that he has failed his one job to protect his family. And I can really feel that would hit home with a lot of people, because I think as a man you feel that, I don't know if it's an obligation, but you definitely kind of feel like a duty. I don't know if those two words are synonymous. Yeah, kind of. But
responsibility, or
kind of a response. Yeah, like
you take it upon yourself. You don't. It's not imposed on you. You accept it.
Right. You volunteer for it. You're like, I'm going to take on the job of the protector of this family, whether anybody asks me to or not. I'm going to take on this job. I'm going to make sure this house is secure. I'm going to make sure that everybody is able to defend themselves has some.
It's your gender role. It's the patriarchy.
It's the patriarchy. But you're taking on responsibility. For all that white male privilege or
Sexist.
Male privilege. You're also taking on an equal amount of responsibility. That's why we're the first ones to die when the boat's going down. So that really appeals to me, that, he felt like he failed in the one job he had, even though he had a whole bunch of jobs and he was doing a bunch of them right. But that was like the main one, is to keep everybody alive, and that he failed in that, and that he was going to, at least seek out justice. So, and the one thing that he couldn't bring his wife back to life, but he could at least see that justice was done.
Yeah, and I find that interesting because I can't see how he could blame himself really for the earlier events that ended up in his wife dying. I mean, he was called into work and he has responsibility there as well. I mean, certainly he can make a decision, right? Make a choice, but he didn't know that this thing was going to happen, right? I'm sure if he had an inkling that it might happen, he would not have gone to work.
Maybe he feels that he didn't have, the house secure enough, like with security systems and having the daughter and the wife trained in firearms and having them in the home and that sort of thing, maybe.
Yeah, maybe, yeah. It seemed like he knew, and this was my biggest problem with the 2018 movie, and I actually want your take on this. Knox is the bad guy, right? The evil dude who, for whatever reason, is behind all this and doesn't just let it go. He wants, I guess, revenge or to one-up Bruce Willis. And so he breaks into the house again and does it on his own. Like, he's actually part of the guys that go in there and do it, right?
Yeah, he assembles a whole new crew to come in at the end.
Yeah, and it seems really stupid. Like, what was the point of that? I mean, I understand it's in the script and it's a movie, but I can't imagine a criminal actually going to that level.
Yeah, you would think that there would be, I mean, at that point it becomes personal, I suppose, when there's the shootout there at the club, and there's the killing of his associates, although he wouldn't care about them.
Right.
But yeah, the idea that he's going to assemble this crew and they're going to go, okay, what's the job? And he's like, we're going to go in and kill some people. And they're like, well, is there going to be like a bunch of money and we're going to get, I mean, we need to get something out of this. We don't care about this person who you hate.
Yeah, and then he's like shadowing him at the hospital and talking to his daughter in the elevator, leering at him.
Yeah, he kind of turns into like a supervillain at that point.
Yeah, and that's just kind of over the top. That's what made the 2018 version a little bit hokey for me.
Hokey, but at least it was a full circular story with a beginning, a middle, and an end that all involved the same characters.
All right, well, let's get into that final summary and review. So, Robert, your little breakdown on 74 versus 2018 and your ratings for each.
Okay, well, 74, I love the look of it. I love the look and feel of a 70s movie. You got that grain, you got the cars that look like they're about 50 feet long and weigh like 10 tons. You got terrible acting. Not only does the main character can't act, but his son-in-law is even worse than him. He calls him dad all the time, and it's really weird and awkward. Luckily, the daughter is in like this vegetative state and can't really act, so it doesn't matter if she can act or not. The mom, she's like dead almost immediately. Jeff Goldblum, who we know can act the pants off anybody in that movie, is only on screen for like a minute or two. It's unfortunate, but whatever. The story of the first one is, I think they both have their own merits. I do like the way the first one kind of exposes government policing and how terrible that is. And the idea that, you need to take care of yourself and protect yourself. And it's more of an everyman kind of situation. He's not like just some movie star, psycho killer guy, Superman killer guy, like he is in the 2018 version. But the first movie, I wouldn't necessarily super recommend it. It's okay. It's like a 5.5 for me. It was fun for kind of nostalgia's sake, but I wouldn't say it's like super great. The 2018 version, it's shot well. Bruce Willis, I can't stand him as an actor. I thought he was super flat most of the time. There were a few scenes where he was acting and he seemed like he was engaged in what was happening in the movie, which is great. He wasn't totally phoning it in, but man, whatever. I still think it's a better movie. It starts off with an opening scene that you can actually feel. It's not an opening scene, but you know what I mean. There's some establishing scenes of him caring about his family. He's loving his family. And then you go into this horrific moment so that you care about these characters when they die and you feel the injustice. And then you get the main character's frustration with the cops and their inability to do anything. And then you get his kind of progression into, what if I did something? And that's where that falls down, because I think there's definitely needs to be a scene where Bruce Willis is like, oh my God, I just killed a man. Even if I was justified, oh my God, this is, holy crap, I've never done this before. Something needs to shake him up. But instead he just like, yeah, I killed a guy and aren't I great? And this feels awesome. Now I can see you, enjoying what you're doing because you're getting the sense of justice and self-righteousness overdoing it. But he's still a human being with emotions. And maybe I didn't kill the right guy, or even if I was right to do what I did, I still took a human life who still could have done, good in the world. They're not all bad all the time. Anyway, I think it's a better movie. I think this is like a 7. I'm not on board with all these super low reviews. I thought it was well done for the most part. I can see what you're saying about the hokiness, about it turning into like a super villain guy, and the motivation of the villain is really kind of iffy. Doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but at least it tells a complete story. So 5.5 and a 7. Go ahead, Daniel.
All right, well, I'm going to do the inverse, because I actually found that the older one was a better movie for me. And I like how it ends on that kind of unfinished note where it's almost like Empire, where there's all this kind of left out in the open. And that just feels better to me because he doesn't get the revenge on the actual perpetrators who caused the harm to.
So let's make some sequels, baby.
Yeah, make 5 of them. But he does get transformed as an individual, and he comes to realize through his trip to Tucson that there is this whole concept of people having the capacity to defend themselves reduces crime. And so he becomes a changed person. And he, even at the end, when he gets out of town and moves to Chicago, he sees another violent act happen. And he's like, well, I guess my services are needed here as well.
Well, that happens in the 2018 version also.
Yeah, where he ends up in New York.
Yeah, but then then it ends and he's got the finger guns, just like the first movie ends. But then there's like AC/DC Back in Black starts playing. And it's like, really? It's time to rock and roll? I don't know. It seems like, I don't know.
Well, that was their montage movie scene, right? With AC/DC too, where he's like learning the skills, acquiring the skills of learning how to fire a gun and get better and better at hitting the target and taking the gun apart and putting it back.
Yeah, and that's where the movie fails. I don't think that tonally that makes any kind of sense. Like now it's time to rock and kick some ass. Yeah. It's like, this is a man who just murdered. So he's just like a doctor. There should have been a scene. At least, I mean, there's one scene where like the cop mentions it. Hey, you're better at saving lives than you are at taking lives. Here's a doctor whose entire life is spent saving lives. He has vowed to do no harm. And here he is killing people. You'd think there'd be some internal conflict there.
Well, and he actually opens the movie by trying to save a cop's life, and then the cop ends up dying. And then he goes and tries to save the perpetrator's life. And I don't think if they show the resolution to that. But I think that's where that's kind of where you're saying you wanted him to stay at, right?
I wanted him to be a normal human being that would have a visceral reaction to taking a human life, especially if you're a doctor whose entire goal in life is to save lives. Now, maybe that scene exists in the script, but Bruce Willis was like, I don't know if I could do this scene. Rip it out. We're not going to shoot that scene. It'll be fine without it. Don't worry, guys. I don't know if you heard that Kevin Smith story, but apparently when he was doing, what's that, Cop Out movie? Kevin Smith had like 30 pages of the script. Bruce Willis was just like, nah, we don't need that scene. Don't need that scene. Don't need that scene. You just rip pages out. Kevin Smith was like, okay, Bruce, I guess we're not doing those scenes.
That's the first I heard of that, but I wouldn't put it past him. I mean, he does have some cachet that he can turn in, and so did Bronson, by the way. I mentioned earlier that he actually had them change the script and the motivations behind the character, the story, the backstory behind the character before he would do the movie, before he agreed to do it. And this was actually Chuck's breakout hit. Like, he had been in a ton of films prior to this, a bunch of Westerns, and I thought that they made a nod to that when they went to Old Tucson in this movie. And he was also in the Magnificent Seven, which we did a show on a while back. And
that's right, he was. Yeah.
But he still wasn't like a big star back then. This was the thing that kind of made him that big star. And
yeah, inexplicably, but yeah. Yeah,
and then within a few years, he was one of the top draws in Hollywood a few years after this film, though he was big in France prior to this. And trivia night question here. He was actually working with Sergio Leone in some of those Westerns, and he was considered for the lead role in Fistful of Dollars, the first of the, what do they call that? The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly trilogy. Mm-hmm. And the role eventually went to one Mr. Clint Eastwood, making him a household name.
The man with no name.
Yeah, and those are great movies, by the way. I think that we should dive into that.
Haven't we talked about one of those? I could have sworn we did at least one, or maybe you mentioned, hey, we should do that
we
whole
did
series.
Outlaw Josie Wales, which I thought was great.
Yeah, it's not very good.
All right, so my ratings and reviews. I really enjoyed the older one. I thought that the concept and the social commentary was better. I liked the ambiguous ending, and I liked the clear juxtaposition between an armed society versus an unarmed society, and they just hit you right in the face with it, like that social commentary. The second one, I think it starts out well. It does have more of a complete story, but then it gets hokey. You know, the AC/DC Black and Black, the lack of remorse or the response to killing people, and then the villain just going off the rails and going into unbelievable uncharted territory. So for me, the 74 is an 8.0. I mean, it's up there, man. It's a good movie.
Wow.
And I'm going to go the 7.0 on the newer one, the 2018 version. I still enjoyed it. And I do recall in some libertarian Facebook groups that we are a part of that people were commenting about how it was such a good movie, but people seem to hate it in general, like the critics and everyone else. And all these libertarians are like, oh, it's actually, pretty good.
This is my notes. Chuck shows up at the hospital. Bad acting ensues. The mom dies. Funeral. More bad acting. That's how my notes go. An 8.0.
Those are quite
generous man. A generous man.
I'm feeling quite generous tonight. Speaking of generous, I think we're going to be generous with your appearances on the show again. You will be back with us next week, and we will also have another guest. I believe it will be Rocky Fahrenberg. Hope I'm saying his name right. We'll get it correct on the show. And we'll be discussing Smallfoot, which apparently has a twist, an angle to it that is fully worthy of discussion. I haven't actually seen it yet, but I did read some Amazon reviews when I ended up buying the movie, and people were saying things like, I saw the trailer and I thought it was going to be one thing, and then we watched the movie and it's totally this other thing. And
yeah, it's got the entire plot revolves around an interesting discussion.
So we'll get into that and actually Can I show it to my kids? Is this kid friendly? Is it okay to watch it?
Yeah,
okay.
It's super kid friendly.
Okay, all right. So it's not like some total like
It's not like the Lion King that you would have them watch like every day of their lives, indoctrinating them with that.
It's a Kuna Matata. Yeah, that's another episode that we did. So we'll be posting that down below on the show notes page, lastnighters.com/53. You can also find it on thelaunchpadmedia.com. And if you like what we do here and you want to support the show and also get pre-show and post-show content, we've got a bunch of other, a variety of benefits and prizes for you at our Patreon at lastnighters.com/Patreon. So we'll be back next week with Smallfoot. Any final words for our audience, Robert Johnson? Of the
Muchas
Last Nighters?
gracias para escuchando. I don't know. I'm butchering that. Sorry, everybody. Trying to resurrect the old Spanish, old high school Spanish. Thanks for listening, everybody. Appreciate it for tuning in. Any kind of support you can give us is duly appreciated. We're at the Patreon at Reed Rothbard. You could also leave us a positive review. You could just get the word out about the show if you like it. If you know anybody you think you might like it, the show, man, let them know. We'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, share it around. Give us some of those ratings on the old iTunes. The more ratings we get, the more prominent the show is when people are doing searches for like movie reviews. And there's about 1,000,003 shows that do this. One of them is actually called Reel on Reels, and they're friends of ours, and I really enjoy their stuff. And so I highly recommend them. I'll post that in our show notes page as well. And with that, I will say good night from last night, everyone. All right, we'll continue a little bit longer on the Actual Anarchy podcast. The anarchist mom, who was our guest on the Lord of the Rings episode a while back, said that the no duty to protect is from the Warren versus District of Columbia decision. And Liberty Weekly does actually have an episode on that, so that it will be the one that I do post on the show notes page at actualanarchy.com/110.
I didn't hear anything of what you said. I was removing my jacket. It's too hot. Maybe I'm coming down with a fever again. I don't know.
It's getting hot in here, so take off all your clothes. However the rest of that song goes. All right, so I have one major question for you for this.
Oh, good. I like questions.
Final portion of the show.
I'm good at trivia.
This is from the 2018 version.
Okay.
The LeBron versus MJ debate. Your thoughts, Robert? Who is the GOAT? I mean, LeBron's still got some games left.
I think you got to wait until LeBron retires to really do that. MJ had an entire team around him that allowed him to win so many championships. LeBron, though, is probably physically a better, specimen. Like, he's taller. He has a more complete game, that sort of thing. But, watching both of them play, there was a time when you were watching the Bulls and, the Bulls would be down like 15 points, whatever, come in the fourth quarter. And then you're just like, well, Michael just decides it's time to win the game. And he just turns it on.
Goes ISO.
And he would score like 25 points in the fourth quarter and no one could stop him. And then the Bulls would win. And I don't know if I see that from LeBron. I don't see that ability to just go, you can't stop me. Just go ahead and try and stop me.
He did have a few quarters, I think, maybe against Boston when I want to say like it was the fourth quarter of some series and he just took over and that turned the series for him. Was that when he was with Cleveland and won the championship? Because I will quibble with you on that Jordan had a complete team around him. I think that he did eventually, but he created that team. He crafted it. He molded it with guys who were on the team, whereas LeBron jumped ship to favorable waters. He teamed up with Chris Bosh and Dwayne Wade, creating the super team.
Yes, he did.
And then he also orchestrated his comeback to Cleveland, also with significant help for his team.
So, sounds like you're on Team MJ.
Well, I think MJ was a maestro. He was a virtuoso, and he had an elegance to him in his ability to play and his viciousness, right? His drive, his
competitiveness. Yeah.
Competitiveness was just off the charts. And I don't think LeBron comes close to that. Now, I do agree that LeBron has more games left in him, and going to the Lakers now, where they have this hodgepodge of young talent and crazy veterans. If he can turn something, a championship out of that without some other big max free agent coming on board or two, then I think he's in MJ territory as far as his legacy and his overall career arc. But we got to remember that MJ took a good 18 months off to go play baseball, and it impacted 2 or 3 years of his career, which was the window for the Sonics, by the way, when they were tip top and super good, and they were blowing it in the first round of the playoffs, two years in a row, I think. First year to Dikembe and second year to the Lakers.
Well, we also don't know how much of an impact Phil Jackson had on MJ's success. MJ had the benefit of working all those years with Phil Jackson.
That's
with the
true.
Bulls.
Also, but the this is a movie show, right? But there have been significant rule changes in the NBA as well. And I think that it's a more physical game in Jordan's era. There's hand checks and other defensive tools in the toolkit.
You could do right. You could definitely be more defensive back then. It's
Right.
basically like today's NFL, where the defense is crippled and handcuffed the whole time. If you're driving to the lane these days, you pretty much can't be touched.
Right, and that's the environment that LeBron plays in. Now, I'm not saying he's not a good player. He is. He's a great player. But this is why the intergenerational comparisons are so difficult. But I got to give MJ the leg up in the debate here.
In the sense of fire, just the overall drive and to win, I've never seen anybody quite like Michael Jordan. There probably are plenty of other athletes that have that drive, but it doesn't match up with the physical talent or just the fact that the focus was so much on him and he had so much impact on each game. Like maybe there's a football player who has that kind of drive, but you don't notice it because he's one of 11 guys on the field.
Right. And then the other thing,
he's not always touching the ball.
The other thing we got to not forget is Jordan played in college, 2-3 years?
Probably, yeah.
And when he was in high school, I think he wasn't even a starter. He wasn't even on the varsity team. So
he got a lot better.
Yeah, he was unregarded going into college. Meanwhile, LeBron had been recruited
out of high school.
He was on the radar before high school.
Yeah, he was pronounced King James when he was like 17 or 18, whatever it was.
Right, so he's going to end up having a longer career than Jordan just because he got the earlier start.
Can you imagine playing high school basketball against LeBron James? Just, I'm going to try and guard him, coach, but I'm sorry in advance. He's going to get like 50 tonight.
Or more.
Yeah.
He's going to go Wilt Chamberlain and drop 100 on us.
Just because he can.
Yeah, anyway, that's our bonus content for our actual Anarchy audience. We really do appreciate you guys, and we'll be back next week with Smallfoot. Any final points regarding the movie, Robert? Death Wish 74 or 2018 before we get into our Kathleen Turner Overdrive, which is available for the Patreon supporters?
I could go look through my notes and think of stuff. There was that one time in the 74 version where he's like at a party and there's that racist argument that lady is talking to. You remember this scene?
I do. Yeah. Refresh me.
Where the guy's like, this guy's a racist. This angel of death. He's going out killing black guys. He's like a white guy going out and killing black guys. And the lady's like, what? So you want him to kill more white muggers or something like that? You want to up the number of white muggers so that he can kill them too?
Oh, yeah. I do remember that. And I think she was making almost I think Ben Shapiro makes this point that most of the violent crime is committed by, statistically speaking, they break it down by race and whatever. And lo and behold, that's the people committing the crimes in these areas. And so if you're going to defend yourselves or seek out vigilante justice, you're going to show a disproportionate number of those people as being on the receiving end of that vigilante justice.
When do you tiptoe around that response?
What do you mean, those people? I didn't tiptoe enough, apparently. Anyway, we can get into a little bit more on the Kathleen Turner Overdrive. I think we should call it on this one. Time of death, actualanarchy.com/110.
Thanks, everybody.
And good night.
The Chipmunks. CHIPMUNK. We're the Chipmunks. Guaranteed to brighten your day. Do 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 do.